What's up, Atlanta United fans? My name is Corey Knapp. Welcome to another edition of 90 on Peachtree. And yes, I'm disappointed. You're disappointed. Atlanta United did not play well over the weekend against Philly. Yet again, the Union just really seemed to have United's number this season. Obviously, Joseph didn't play, and that just kind of seemed to throw everything off with the attack. They didn't play with a striker to start out with. Barco was kind of playing a false nine with no one behind him. And they just never could kind of really seem to get in a groove. They made a couple errors. They did get some nice chances, but Philly really dominated the game from the start. And you know what? That's okay. Atlanta has played so well these last couple of months and has progressed so well through this coaching change and transition that the real measure of what Atlanta's doing will be how they bounce back from that loss against Philly. The Atlanta United of earlier this season would let that turn into 3 or 4 losses in a row. And so we'll see on Wednesday, we'll see this weekend again, just how far they've come and how they bounce back from a loss. And we saw it right away at the start of Pineda's tenure. They lost to Nashville, then rattled off a couple wins in a row and played really, really well. And so if they can do that again, then we'll just see this as just a tough game, Philly having their number, and just being something that they can bounce back from and learn from and continue to progress from. But that's enough about all that. This week on the show, I have another treat for you guys. We're going to do another interview. I'm going to be joined by my friend Yash Bhika. Yash is a fellow Georgia Bulldog, just like me. He's a huge soccer fan, and he hosts his own show, The Premier Pod, that talks about all things Premier League, UEFA Champions League, and just soccer in general every week. Yash and I talk about Atlanta United's summer surge over the last couple of months, Ezequiel Barco's run of form that has positioned him to be a potential transfer target either this summer or next summer, how that mirrors with Miguel Almirón's own transfer to Newcastle in the Premier League, Ronaldo's return to the Premier League with Manchester United, and who could win the Premier League, and who are maybe the favorites for the Champions League as well. And lastly, we go through some of our go-to players and teams when we're playing FIFA. And right before we get to that interview, a shout out to my first interview guest, Harris Kruskic, who correctly answered last week's trivia question. Be sure to tune into my Twitter and Instagram for this week's, and if you answer it and are the first one to submit, you can get a video feature like this in next week's episode. Alright, on to the interview. Yash Bhika, welcome to 90 on Peachtree.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Thanks for having me on.
So first off, I just want to get your impressions of Atlanta United's strong summer surge that they have been on of late. What are your impressions of them?
Yeah, so Atlanta United, they've been on a crazy run. I know, obviously, it just ended, unfortunately, with the Union match this past weekend. But overall, since the Olympics, and obviously since Atlanta United made the decision to fire Gabriel Hines, and obviously when Rob Valentino came in as interim manager, and then they bring in Gonzalo Pineda. They've just been on a whole nother level. They've just been playing like Atlanta United of old, the Atlanta United that Tata Martino brought to the city, the one that pretty much everyone, even if you were a hardcore soccer fan or a casual soccer fan, like people just clung onto Atlanta United because of the way they played. They were exciting. They played with pace. They played with no fear, essentially, just trying to score as many goals as possible, playing fun, exciting soccer. And I think we've seen that during this, big impressive run that they've been on. Joseph Martinez coming back has been a plus, but I think, among other things, Ezequiel Barco, since he's come back from the Olympics, has looked like a brand new player. Like, he just looks like a very more consistent player. And it was crazy. I was checking his age. I think he's only like 20 or 21 still. It's just amazing how young he is, because he's been in the Atlanta United spotlight for so long. So it makes you think that he's maybe like 25 or 26, but the kid is still super young. And it just shows that, there are a lot of expectations that were thrown on him at such a young age, but now he's starting to live up to it and do it a little bit more consistently. And I think him, and along with, Luis Arujo, Marcelino Moreno, that whole attacking, I guess, quartet of players they have up there, it's just it's been amazing. It's just a really fun team to watch in the MLS right now.
Yeah, that's a great point you make about playing without fear. That's something that I think we've all kind of realized, but maybe haven't been able to kind of verbalize. That's a great point. And I think Barco, especially, like, he's been given that freedom, and like, he's not really afraid to make mistakes playing super aggressively and kind of driving down the field with the ball, without the ball, and kind of creating those attacks. And that gets into my next question. He's been on fire. We call it the Barc Renaissance on this show of late. Do you think he's, and again, like you said, he's still super young. He's been with the team for a while. Do you think he's finally reached that point where he's going to be a target this summer for clubs in England, clubs in Europe? Do you think he's finally kind of reached that point in his career?
I feel like he's getting to the cusp of it. I think, this, I guess, he did impress during the Olympics, and obviously coming back, he's been a huge resurgence in terms of his form and being very consistent. But I think, give him maybe another year. If we can get another year of Barco and he can continuously play at this high level, I definitely think a good amount of European teams could come knocking on the door to, scoop him up, because the fact that he's still so young, he's kind of on that age of where Miguel Almirón was, where I don't remember the exact age, but I know he was still in his really early 20s when he moved out to Newcastle United. And, compared that to Joseph Martinez, who's kind of, I wouldn't say ending, going to the twilight of his career, but he's literally at his prime around 28, 29. And once you reach that age, a lot of European clubs tend not to come knocking. They're usually looking for the super young, bright stars like Alfonso Davies, Ricardo Pepi, who is reportedly going to be on a move to a European team. So that 18 to 22, I feel 23 age range is usually when the clubs in Europe are interested in the players. And I think Barco, maybe not this summer, but I feel like another season at Atlanta United, if he can continue his performances, I definitely feel like a European club, one or two, should definitely be looking at him, and I think he probably will get scooped up eventually, because he's too talented of a player to not at least dip his feet into the European market a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the key, like you started to touch on there, is getting kind of that full season, or kind of that more extended time of where he's really playing that well. Like Miguel had, I mean, his first season with Atlanta, he was really strong, and then leveled up in 2018 when they won the cup. And then
Mm-hmm.
it was so clear that he was ready to make that jump. And yeah, I think if Barco finishes this season, and then is able to have something next season that's really kind of that consistent window of high level play, then you're exactly right. And that kind of goes into my next question. How is our boy Miggy doing over there in Newcastle? How are things going for him, for the team? What's kind of his overall transition been like the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's been an interesting one. I remember on my podcast, like me and my buddy, when we were recording it, like our first season recording the podcast was the season Miguel made the switch from Atlanta United to Newcastle. And at the time, he was under the tutelage of Rafa Benitez. And we thought, okay, that's a pretty good move, even though Benitez is known to be a very defensive manager, likes to worry about the defensive side of the ball first, then the attack. He's still a world class manager, and under his tutelage, maybe he could have taken him to the next level. But unfortunately, I think that season, he basically got half a season with Rafa Benitez, and then there was some falling out with the ownership. And Steve Bruce came in to become the new manager for Newcastle. And Steve Bruce, he's an all right manager. He's not the best out there. And unfortunately, he's a very, very defensive coach. He prioritizes being super solidified on the defense and just basically playing on the counterattack. And because of that, I feel like Miguel Almirón, he's in a system that doesn't really suit the way he needs to play. Although, he is a very pacey player, he can play on that transition really well, like what we saw with Atlanta United. I feel like with the current manager, with Steve Bruce, and they have another brilliant player, Alan Saint Maximum, who's in that same boat that's with Miguel Almirón, where there's really talented attacking players, but they struggle to kind of, I guess, showcase the best of themselves in this system. And with Steve Bruce, you're just getting a really defensive side of the game where all he cares about is just setting up shop, trying to claim the clean sheet, trying to reduce the amount of chances the other team has. And because of that, Almirón has suffered, and we've seen it in terms of his output. He can be a little bit erratic when it comes to in front of goal, whether that's finding the final pass or getting off the final shot. Sometimes his finishing can kind of let him down, and I still think that's kind of been the biggest downfall. I feel like he still hasn't improved that side of his game, even though he may have the vision to pull off a pass. In terms of finishing those chances or maybe picking the right decision at the right time, still think he still hasn't, I guess, taken that next leap or taking that next step, unfortunately. But I think there's been a lot of factors that have kind of played into that. But talk to any Newcastle fan, they still really love Miguel Almirón. They really like him as a player. So I think it's more just the system has kind of let him down. And unfortunately, because of that, we haven't seen 100% of what Miguel Almirón could have brought to the Premier League under the Newcastle system.
Yeah, do you think that's even a bit of a cautionary tale? I mean, obviously you can't predict a coaching change mid-season, but just for players and clubs themselves when they're making these deals or thinking about these moves over to Europe, that it may be better to kind of stick where you are and wait another year versus going into a situation that might not be the best kind of for your progression.
Yeah, it's interesting because compared to the European, I guess, transfer market, the transfer market, the summer window open from July, or excuse me, from June up until August, and then the winter transfer window is basically open all the way up into January, and that's because the European season starts in August, ends in May. But for MLS, it's such a weird system where
It's
they
all
start.
over.
Yeah, they're starting their league, I believe, in I guess the first couple matches are in February, and while everyone else is on off season, they're still playing matches in the summer. And because of that, you have this weird position where you have players that are in season form, but going to clubs that are just starting preseason, or they just wrapped up their season. They just had the big celebrations. They're on kind of vacation, and all of a sudden they're being brought back in into a midseason form where all the players are kind of in form. Then they have to kind of get their fitness up. So I feel like that because of the MLS schedule, the way it is, it hinders a lot of the excellence we could see with certain players. But obviously, players like Alphonso Davies have, lit the world on fire with, especially with Bayern Munich. And, you could say, oh, it's just excuses, but I feel like that definitely does play a role into it because, when you're on off season and then you get transferred over to a club that's in season that needs you to perform right away, it takes a couple weeks to get adjusted. And because of that, I think it does hinder some of the performances. And like you said, when you come into January, there's a chance that a coach could get sacked at the end of the season, and that coach really wanted you, but then the next coach probably doesn't want anything to do with you. So it is a cautionary tale, but I do understand the plight of these players. Like, if you're in the MLS is growing and it's getting really good, but the chance to play in Europe or play under those big European teams, I think that lure still brings them in. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to stop. I think it's good for the league that more players actually do go out to Europe because it shows that, we are producing, America's really producing some really good players. So I still think it's the betterment of the league that they do leave, but it makes it a little bit difficult on the player side for sure.
We could absolutely do a whole episode on the different schedules and how much MLS is hurting itself by playing on the opposite kind of time frame. But we'll leave that. For now, we've gotten into it a bit. Obviously, you're a big EPL guy, big Premier League guy. Can you tell us just how big of a deal Cristiano Ronaldo's return to Manchester United is? Can you put that in perspective?
Yeah, so as you can see from the jersey, I'm a huge Manchester United fan, and it's funny my buddy I do the podcast with, he's a huge Liverpool fan, but even he was pretty hyped that Ronaldo was coming back because I'm sure we all know his first stint at United. He came in as a young teenager, basically turned into one of the two greatest players, depending on who you talk to, ever and in the world right now. And he was gone for such a long time. Went to Real Madrid, pretty much essentially won everything you can at a club level with Real Madrid, moved to Juventus. Unfortunately, his time at Juventus hasn't been as successful as he would have hoped, not getting to the Champions League final, not winning it. Juventus struggling on a lot of their, in the Serie A, they've been struggling a little bit the past couple of seasons with Ronaldo. But the fact that he's come back even at the age of 36, he is obviously at the end of his career, but the way he keeps himself up to date with his fitness and his diet, he's still playing as if he's 28 or 30 years old. And it's pretty remarkable that he's still at that fitness level. And, the fact that he came back, it just brought such a big buzz back to Manchester United, especially to the Premier League. And it's so interesting because I remember 10 years ago, which is what 2011 now, which is crazy. 2011, if you were to rank in terms of the leagues where they would rank, I think pretty much everyone would have penciled in La Liga as number one because of the fact they had Messi, Ronaldo, they had Jose Mourinho, they had Pep Guardiola, they had two of the best coaches in the world, two of the best players in the world, the best teams. And now, if you're looking at 2021, I feel like that's totally flipped, where La Liga, in a sense, has kind of been on the downturn, and the Premier League has taken an upturn with the amount of money, the TV revenue coming in, and the fact that the likes of Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, um, all hold these great superstars, like probably some of the best players in the world are now playing in the Premier League. And the fact that Ronaldo come back just kind of cemented that the Premier League, I would say arguably for the next couple of years will probably be the best league in the world right now, just because of the sheer talent in the league and the fact that you have five teams, or I would say four or five teams that could realistically challenge for the title. And you don't really see that a lot in the other big top five leagues, Bundesliga, Bayern Munich, and Dortmund, but really it's Bayern Munich most of the time. France, I know PSG didn't win the title. Leo won the title this past season, but usually PSG, especially the way they retooled, it should be PSG. So other leagues don't really have in terms of that competition for the top title spot, but I feel like the Premier League is one of those few leagues that actually does have that huge competition for the top first places. So essentially, it was a huge deal that it came back. Just there's so much buzz around the league and especially Manchester United.
And you mentioned the Champions League. You mentioned his time at Real Madrid. I'm a big Real Madrid fan, so obviously followed him through all of that. So speaking of the Premier League and of the Champions League, how realistic and how serious of a contender now is Man United for each of those titles with Ronaldo?
Yeah, it's weird. I think if you were to ask any Manchester United fan going into the season, especially after the end of last season, the biggest needs were obviously signing a right winger, which they did with Jadon Sancho, signing a center back. But the biggest priority, I would say, for most fans, if you were to ask them, was signing a central defensive midfielder. Because right now, the club, in terms of their starting 11, that's the biggest sore spot of the team. Because if you look at all the top European teams around the world, they have that class central defensive midfielder that can sweep up play, you know, essentially is cool, calm, and collected on the ball. For years it was Real Madrid, it was Casemiro. For Bayern Munich, they have the name is escaping me, Kimmich, and then
Mhm.
Chelsea they have Conte. Liverpool have Fabinho and Henderson that can exchange in those roles. So you look at all these top teams, they have that class central defensive midfielder, but Manchester United unfortunately don't have that. And even though we did sign Ronaldo, yeah, there was a sense that okay, we've got that buzz, we've got like title winners in the squad. But if you look at the squad, unfortunately, I think just the fact that we don't have that central defensive midfielder position locked down, I think that's going to be the thing that probably ends up destroying us when it comes to the title race. Because unfortunately, because we don't have that, we end up having to play two defensive midfielders instead of one, and that basically requires either Pogba to go on the left wing or to sacrifice one of our attackers. So I think we're still in the fight when it comes to competing for a Champions League title and the Premier League title, but I just don't think without that central defensive midfielder position, I think we just may fall short on both of those competitions. I think the Champions League, just due to the fact that it's a knockout competition and anything can kind of happen, that gives us a little bit of an edge on that sense. But when it comes to the Premier League, it's going to be really tough. It's going to be really tough to see them win it, especially without that defensive midfielder. So I still have my hopes. I think they can win it, but you know, I just don't know if they can consistently put up the performances to do it. That's the thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask based on what you were saying, if maybe just the fact that the Champions League, just with the format that it is, that maybe just being able to go out and say, all right, we're going to score 4 or 5 today, and that's going to be our goal. And like if we give up 3 or 4, then that's how it is. But we'll progress. That maybe kind of lends itself better to just the possibility of rather than having week in week out have to perform on at the Premier League level.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the problem is also Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the Manchester United manager, has come under a lot of scrutiny, especially after this past weekend's result with Aston Villa losing. I think it's now 3 losses in the last 4 matches for United, and that's kind of been the biggest crux. Is yeah, Ole's got the backing now, and that's the biggest thing. He's now got the backing that other United managers haven't had in the past. But now, can he actually put together the consistency that was missing of last season? And right now it's showing a little bit that it's going to be a bit of a struggle, but I still have faith that he can get kicked on, and they can get the squad rolling. They did bring in a lot of new players, so a lot of it is kind of gelling and getting used to each other. But I think that's going to be the biggest thing, is whether they can be consistently good enough. I think there was someone on Twitter that I follow that sums up Manchester United as like being consistently inconsistent, and I think that's kind of the best way to describe them, because at times they can look like world beaters, where wow, they can actually
Mhm.
win some major competitions, and other times they just look like they can't do anything correctly. So it's about if Solskjaer can kind of find that consistency, and that's usually where you have your great managers that could do that. But I feel like with the Champions League, I still think that it lends itself the way the knockout stage is. I still think the way we play, we can progress through there. Obviously, the challenge now is to qualify out of the group, because we didn't start too well against Young Boys, losing that one. But I think with the Champions League, we may have a better shot at it, just because of the fact that it's a little bit of a big variable in terms of what you can expect week in and week out.
And I like asking people this who are fans of different teams in different leagues. If you could only pick one for this season, would you rather your team win the Champions League or win the league title?
Oh, that's tough. If I had to pick, I'd probably say, let's win the Premier League. I know that sounds. I know you'll get a mixture, but I feel like United haven't won the Premier League. It's so long. Like the last time they won it was, Sir Alex Ferguson's last season at the club. So I think that was 2012, the year they won it. So now that's been
Almost a
well,
decade.
2012, 13. Yeah, literally, yeah, almost a decade. So the likes of Chelsea, Manchester City, Liverpool, Leicester City won it that one crazy year. The fact that all those teams have come in and won the league, it hurts United fans because it's like, man, we were there at one point and we've been struggling for so long. So I would say if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick Premier League because I think it'd be just one up over the rivals. It'd be great.
Yeah, yeah. I see where you're coming from, and it's so fun. Like if you ask a PSG fan, they would absolutely say, like you said, they run through the French league every year. They'd say the Champions League. Bayern would probably say the Champions League, and just the different Premier League teams, just depending on when maybe they last won the league title, they would say we want the Champions League.
Mhm.
La Liga, Real Madrid, Barcelona. I really got into Madrid watching them play in the Champions League, and so La Liga has always been maybe a little secondary. And just the fact that the Champions League, it's a tournament, it's win or go home. That
Yeah,
just
yeah.
appeals to me a ton. But yeah, just that's a question I love asking people based on who they root for and what leagues that they're kind of tuned into. Um, so kind of looking at the Premier League as a whole so far, almost 2 months into the season now. What's been the biggest surprise for you over these first couple months?
Yeah, biggest surprise. It's actually funny. I may get like get laughed at this one, but I remember going into the season, I actually said that I thought that Chelsea would struggle a lot this season under Tuchel, and I was basically just using this as my reasoning was Chelsea after they win a title, they tend to struggle the next season with either manager consistency or inconsistency with performances or players not really being up to it. But it seems like Tuchel is kind of I don't know, found the right edge with this Chelsea side. They look very, very detailed. They look very, compact. They just look like they're playing for the manager. They just look so strong. And I know this past performance against Man City wasn't that great, but for me, I think one of the great, I guess the best things I've seen this season so far is just the pure consistency of how good Chelsea have been, but also just looking at it a little bit further behind is just the how strong the top four sides are, including Manchester United, Liverpool, City, and Chelsea. I feel like this season we may actually see an actual four-horse title race, and we haven't seen since I started watching the Premier League. I haven't seen a title race that big, or even a two-person title race that big in so long. I think the last one was Liverpool City when uh, Liverpool, I believe, fell just 1 point short of hitting the 100-point mark, and City ended up winning that year. But I think yeah, that's been the biggest one. It's just how strong the top four teams have been because they've retooled and there's just a huge gap. Once you go past from Manchester United down to fifth and sixth, there's a huge gap of talent. And yeah, just the top four has just been crazy good this year.
Especially just with, I mean, how short of a break and how compact last season was,
Yeah.
trying to finish that, the Euros over the summer, World Cup
Yeah.
qualifying, just all of
They've
that.
been
Just
playing so much. It's honestly crazy how much the players have been playing. I do feel bad because I feel like the fact that they have been playing so much, obviously, like the bodies are going to wear out and players are going to be more susceptible to hamstring injuries,
Mhm.
muscle fatigue. I just hope that doesn't happen. I hope the players can stay healthy, but it's just unfortunate that they literally at the expense of our entertainment, they've just been run to the ground with the amount of games they've had to play since start of last season, obviously.
Yeah, and I think fans kind of collectively are kind of realizing that more. Like these guys are playing every week for 3 quarters of the year. Sometimes
Yeah.
they got to play Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday again, and these
Yeah.
are high level matches. Like you said, you can't miss a beat with those top four teams kind of running out there. You got to put those 3 points up.
hmm Yeah, it's crazy. I think the Euros we saw, obviously, a couple of the big name players get injured, but I just hope that unfortunately, with the talk of like FIFA basically putting out the idea of like every 2 years having a World Cup, a men's World Cup, that will just be awful because the players literally probably will never get a break. Because if you're talking about, finishing up the league season, some federations have summer tournaments they want to have players at.
Mhm.
You throw in the Euros, then you throw in a FIFA World Cup every 2 years. These players will just never get any break in the summer, and I think that would be hard because you may start seeing a lot of players either retire early or they might essentially they'll just get injured way too much just because they're not getting enough breaks. So I hope that the World Cup stays every 4 years, so that way at least the players can get a good summer break in them because it's rough out there. If you got to play 40, 50 games, especially if you're a top club, you know, you're playing close to maybe 60 games a season just based on all the competitions alone. That's just so much.
Yeah, I think I had read during the Euros that Bruno Fernandes had played the most games of anyone within kind of the last
Yeah.
calendar year, and I think it was more than 60, which is just
It's
it's
just
crazy.
crazy.
And like props to him, and that's incredibly impressive. But the product on the field, like by no fault of the players, like if they're playing that much and teams are playing that much, it just goes down, and then you don't want your fans to be watching every week and be like, oh, this level of play or quality of play is bad, and it's like, well, because they're playing so much and they're exhausted. So there's definitely that
Yeah.
balance to find for sure.
Yeah, and it's been really tough too because not only you have to get ready for the league season, but you get thrown into preseason really quickly, and it was just crazy when they finished Project Restart. Obviously, when they were trying to get player or get games in during COVID, and that season ended, they started all of the past season basically in a span of a couple weeks. That's all the players got, and they played an entire league season. And not only that, because of where the season was, they were playing games at such short time, and then coming into this season, it's just been so much that they've been playing, and we've seen some players go down, but hopefully, as he said, it seems like all fans have kind of realized, like, yeah, we need to. These guys definitely just need like a break, like a decent amount of break, just to get them, sorted out physically and mentally.
All right, I got one more here for you before we wrap up. How much FIFA do you play, and who is your go-to team? Is it Man United, or if you play Ultimate Team, who is your must-have player?
Yeah, so I do play a tad bit FIFA. Actually, I think I play a little bit more than I would like to say. But in terms of Ultimate Team, I never actually got into Ultimate Team until this past FIFA with 21. And yeah, I just really got into it. I was playing a ton of FIFA 21 Ultimate Team. I actually ended up packing a Team of the Season Mason Mount card out of just some random free pack. So that was like the highlight of the FIFA 21 for me. But in terms of, I guess, my go-to team, I always like experimenting with the other clubs, with other teams and what they have. But usually, the kind of go-to I kind of look for in terms of every FIFA, that's just it kind of makes for a very enjoyable game. I look for a team that has a decent amount of 5-star or 4-star skillers, or a team that has a lot of pace. Because if you have a team that has a lot of pace, you can kind of just have fun with it. You can just knock through balls in, or long balls in, or you could do some fancy flicks and tricks to kind of put a little bit of extra sauce on the goals. But I kind of look for those teams that kind of have those players. But in terms of Ultimate Team, I guess when you start off the game, one of my go-tos that I used in 21 a lot, I loved using Adama Traore, even though he was a little bit of expensive. Martial was always a good one to go to earlier in the game. Um, yeah, here, this is what I did. I remember when I first got like FIFA 21 Ultimate Team, the way I built it was I had a lot of Brazilian players because tend to have a lot of them had the 5-star skills. So I had
Mhm.
Vinicius, I had this guy named Axel Torreira, I think I had Paulinho in the midfield. So I had a lot of these like crazy Brazilian players in there, but they were always quick. They always had a lot of skill moves, and they were just generally just pretty fun to play with. I know one of my buddies, he actually uses Roberto Firmino a lot in the beginning half of the game because of the fact that he's a 5-star skiller and can kind of just easily move his way around the pitch. So yeah, those are kind of the go-tos. But I know what I've been hearing from this new one, FIFA 22. I've been hearing that the gameplay is a lot more realistic, as people have been saying. So it's not so dependent on you doing a bunch of skill moves. It's actually a little bit more based on, can you pass the ball around? Can you actually work your way to the goal, instead of just kind of doing the normal 21 way of just skilling your way around and just knocking a through ball through. So I think I do prefer it that way. I do like when the game feels a little bit more realistic. So I guess now that the gameplay has changed a little bit, it may have to tinker with who I normally go to. But how about you? Who do you kind of go for?
I really haven't. I was kind of like you. I really haven't dabbled in Ultimate Team very
Hmm.
much. I did a little bit with 21, but just kind of fell back into my normal. I'll play with Real Madrid a lot. I'll do some Atlanta United seasons and tournaments and runs. I did just because I'm such a big Ronaldo fan. I played with Juventus for a while and really kind of enjoyed playing, kind of having him at the front of the attack, and their formation was a little bit more fun to play with,
Hmm.
and their personnel than Madrid's was at the time. This was kind of when Madrid was struggling before they brought Zidane back in.
Yeah.
And once they did that, I kind of got back into Madrid's 4-3-3. I love having Casemiro. You mentioned him earlier, and just the Brazilians overall with Vinicius and Rodrigo.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love playing with Real Madrid, and I'm so connected to those guys watching them, and so I really like playing with them too.
Yeah, no, it must have been great to like watch their three-peat. Like that was just I remember watching that just from like afar. Like that was just incredible that they were able to just go three-peat like that. That's just unheard of in the Champions League. And the fact that they
Yeah,
did it was crazy.
yeah, it was special for sure. All right.
Yeah.
Before we go, let the people know where and when they can get your podcast and what content you put out there.
Yeah, so if you are interested in any Premier League news, so the podcast I run is called the Premier Pod, and it's a weekly podcast that I've been doing with a buddy of mine who's actually a Liverpool fan for the past entering the fourth season now of just a weekly show, just rounding out like some of the biggest Premier League topics, whether it be like the biggest headlines. Obviously, when there's international breaks, we dabble into the Champions League. International break, talk a little bit of FIFA, kind of all around just fun, casual Premier League podcast that we love talking about. And you can catch the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you really watch or listen to any I guess podcast platform out there. It should be on there. We also have a YouTube page at Premier Pod, where you can watch the video versions of the podcast, or yeah, if you want to catch the video versions of it. But literally any podcast platform you could think of at the Premier Pod, you can find us on there. And yeah, it's just a cool, casual conversation about soccer and Premier League. And yeah, it's fun. We have a fun time every week talking about
Awesome. We love that. I'll make sure we get all that info down
it.
there in the description in the card so people can find you. Yash, thank you again for joining us. This was a great conversation. It was really fun. I appreciate you coming on and enjoy the rest of the Premier League season.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it.
Thanks again, Yash. Be sure to follow him and the Premier Pod at all of these handles below, as well as all of the links in the descriptions. Find his podcast and his show wherever you get your podcasts, and you can watch the YouTube versions as well, like he said. And you can answer one of the questions I asked him. Would you rather your team win the league title or the Champions League title in a given season? Comment below, reply below on this video, on my video, on Yash's videos, on his podcast, wherever they are. Let us know what you think. Before we go, remember, Atlanta has another big matchup this weekend against Montreal on Saturday night. They're neck and neck in the standings as Atlanta United needs to continue grabbing those points and moving up further and further into that tight Eastern Conference race. And so they'll do that this weekend against Montreal. Hopefully we'll see Joseph back, and hopefully they'll get back into a nice little rhythm like they had before the shutout against Philadelphia. And once that game is done, we'll be back here next week with another episode of 90 on Peachtree. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our Atlanta Sports Unlimited channel below. And you can follow me, Atlanta Sports Unlimited, Yash, and his Premier Pod as well at all of these handles below that are on the screen, that are in the descriptions. They're all over. We'll make sure you can find them and follow all of us. We appreciate all of that. Y'all enjoy the weekend, enjoy the matches, and we will see you guys next week here on 90 on Peachtree. I'm Corey Knapp.